Hello, how's it going? It's good to have you here. I don't know if you can hear it, but there's a raven outside my door. He's been here all of my morning routine this morning. I think he's a he. I feel like all ravens are boys. I know that can't be true, but I like to think that they're all boys. Wearing all black, it's cool. I'm going to read an excerpt from a book that Neville Goddard wrote called Out of This World. In my view, this is the excerpt of all excerpts. And the moment I heard it, made everything magical in the world ever since. Now that I know this from learning from Neville, I view every being and I view every item, everything I look at as purely magical. I can't not. So maybe after you've heard this excerpt, you will get a little bit closer to seeing things that way too. Maybe you already do. If you do, welcome. If you don't, welcome. I'm drilling straight down to the excerpt, cutting straight to the chase. And then I will drill back out again and read its lead up and continue to the end of the main body of the information that makes sense to me, to give it all context. And I am accompanying it with a visual delight that I recorded that makes sense to me, to pair with it. If it makes sense to you or doesn't make sense to you, that's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting. It's interesting to me. Here is the excerpt. When I meet you, I meet a cross-section of the four-dimensional you. The four-dimensional self that is not seen. To see the four-dimensional self, I must see every cross-section or moment of your life, from birth to death, and see them all as coexisting. My focus should take in the entire array of sensory impressions which you have experienced on earth, plus those you might encounter. I should see them not in the order in which they were experienced by you, but as a present whole. Because change is the characteristic of the fourth dimension, I should see them in a state of flux, as a living, animated whole. Now here is the broader excerpt. Experience an imagination with all the distinctness of reality. What would be experienced in the flesh were you to achieve your goal? And you shall, in time, meet it in the flesh as you met it in your imagination. Feed the mind with premises, that is, assertions presumed to be true, because assumptions, though unreal to the senses, if persisted in until they have the feeling of reality, will harden into facts. To an assumption, all means which promote its realization are good. It influences the behavior of all by inspiring in all the movements, the actions, and the words which tend towards its fulfillment. To understand how man moulds his future in harmony with his assumption, we must know what we mean by a dimensionally larger world. For it is to a dimensionally larger world that we go to alter our future. The observation of an event before it occurs implies that the event is predetermined from the point of view of man in the three-dimensional world. Therefore, to change the conditions here in the 3 dimensions of space, we must first change them in the 4 dimensions of space. Man does not know exactly what is meant by a dimensionally larger world, and would no doubt deny the existence of a dimensionally larger self. He is quite familiar with the 3 dimensions of length, width, and height, and he feels that if there were a 4th dimension, it should be just as obvious to him as the dimensions of length, width, and height. A dimension is not a line. It is any way in which a thing can be measured that is entirely different from all other ways. That is, to measure a solid 4th dimensionally, we simply measure it in any direction except that of its length, width, and height. Is there another way of measuring an object other than those of its length, width, and height? Time measures my life without employing the 3 dimensions of length, width, and height. There is no such thing as an instantaneous object. Its appearance and disappearance are measurable. It endures for a definite length of time. We can measure its lifespan without using the dimensions of length, width, and height. Time is definitely a 4th way of measuring an object. The more dimensions an object has, the more substantial and real it becomes. A straight line, which lies entirely in 1 dimension, acquires shape, mass, and substance by the addition of dimensions. What new quality would time, the 4th dimension, give which would make it just as vastly superior to solids as solids are to surfaces and surfaces are to lines? Time is a medium for changes in experience because all changes take time. The new quality is changeability. Observe that if we bisect a solid, its cross-section will be a surface. By bisecting a surface, we obtain a line, and by bisecting a line, we get a point. This means that a point is but a cross-section of a line, which is, in turn, but a cross-section of a surface, which is, in turn, but a cross-section of a solid, which is, in turn, if carried to its logical conclusion, but a cross-section of a 4-dimensional object. We cannot avoid the inference that all 3-dimensional objects are but cross-sections of 4-dimensional bodies, which means when I meet you, I meet a cross-section of the 4-dimensional you, the 4-dimensional self that is not seen. To see the 4-dimensional self, I must see every cross-section or moment of your life from birth to death and see them all as coexisting. My focus should take in the entire array of sensory impressions which you have experienced on earth, plus those you might encounter. I should see them not in the order in which they were experienced by you, but as a present whole. Because change is the characteristic of the 4th dimension, I should see them in a state of flux as a living, animated whole. If we have all this clearly fixed in our minds, what does it mean to us in this three-dimensional world? It means that if we can move along time's length, we can see the future and alter it as we so desire. This world, which we think so solidly real, is a shadow out of which and beyond which we may at any time pass. It is an abstraction from a more fundamental and dimensionally larger world, a more fundamental world abstracted from a still more fundamental and dimensionally larger world, and so on to infinity. The absolute is unattainable by any means or analysis, no matter how many dimensions we add to the world. Man can prove the existence of a dimensionally larger world simply by focusing his attention on an invisible state and imagining that he sees and feels it. If he remains concentrated in this state, his present environment will pass away and he will awaken in a dimensionally larger world where the object of his contemplation will be seen as a concrete objective reality. Intuitively, I feel that were he to abstract his thoughts from this dimensionally larger world and retreat still farther within his mind, he would again bring about an externalization of time. He would discover that every time he retreats into his inner mind and brings about an externalization of time, space becomes dimensionally larger. And he would, therefore, conclude that both time and space are serial, and that the drama of life is but the climbing of a multitudinous dimensional time block. Scientists will one day explain why there is a serial universe, but in practice, how we use this serial universe to change the future is more important. To change the future, we need only concern ourselves with two worlds in the infinite series. The world we know by reason of our bodily organs, and the world we perceive independently of our bodily organs. Thank you, Neville. You're a good man.